Welcome to the Straight Talk on Fleet podcast with Erin Gilchrist. Each week, Erin will be breaking down fleet management, trying to cut through the noise and get down to the real issues safety and operations leaders are struggling with every day. The goal will be to get to the bottom of how leaders can break down these silos of information and accelerate change management, how to use real-time, accurate data to drive massive efficiencies across fleet-focused business processes, and to elevate people's careers with emerging best practices. Now it's time for the Straight Talk on Fleet.
It's so amazing that in just a little over 2.5 years, we are recording episode 63. So first off, before we kick anything off, welcome, Phil. Guys, this is Phil. He's joining us today. Thanks for being with us today, Phil.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So on the Straight Talk on Fleet, what we try to do is be that objective and reliable source for the fleet community. We're building this ecosystem where fleet managers can come together, share ideas, learn, help each other, and certainly elevate our careers. So if you don't know me, I'm Erin Gilchrist, and I am VP of Fleet Evangelism at IntelliShift. And that just means I get to do this, right? I'm an evangelist about all things fleet because I'm super passionate about sustainability and safety and efficiency for fleets and safety and operations leaders. So that's what we try to do here, hoping we do that again today. So again, we have Phil Mirisola with us from Coast, and Phil is the Director of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at Coast. Again, welcome, Phil. Coast is one of IntelliShift's fleet fueling partners, and Coast is helping fleets take back control, which I talk about a lot on this podcast, of their fueling programs with a modern, easy-to-use software, better security, better visibility, and responsiveness here in the US, right? With fair fees and generous rewards for its customers. So today, Phil and I are going to talk about some of the challenges that fleet leaders have and face with fuel programs and with fuel payment solutions. The good news is that there are some great solutions in the marketplace that help eliminate some of these challenges so that people like me and you, fleet and operations leaders, can focus more on our strategic goals and initiatives. And we know, based on the current environment, that there are so many competing initiatives. So before we dig in, Phil, take a minute, tell us about you, how you got into the fleet industry, and what you're doing at Coast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Erin. I've been at Coast for a little over two and a half years at this point, and have been primarily focused on standing up really cool partnerships in the space to get our solution in front of end users and customers who are looking to kind of get better control of their fuel expenses and their expenses more in general. And so we've been at it for about 4 years now, building a fleet card expense management platform with the sole focus of really getting folks to be able to spend less. We talk about credit
That
card
helps.
programs and card solutions all the time, and even on the consumer side, you see it. All of these offers in front of you to get you to swipe your card more and more, right, and put more spending on those credit cards. And so our sole focus as a business is how can we work with fleet businesses and how help them kind of control those costs and expenses in real time.
Excellent. All those things sound glorious. As a fleet manager, I know how challenging things are as it relates to, well, all things fleet management, but certainly as it relates to fuel. So, from my perspective, there are so many challenges to overcome just in the areas of fuel management, payment solutions with physical cards, security fraud, all kinds of fun stuff, and just overall day-to-day efficiency for drivers. Because when I think about what drivers do, Phil, it's like we want to make all the fleet stuff really easy so they can focus on that service delivery that we expect them to do. We expect them to be professional drivers, and we expect them to deal with payment solutions and identifying themselves and their vehicle every day and vehicle inspections and all this stuff. So the more simple that we can make all this stuff, the better chance we have at improving compliance. So on that note, let's roll through some of these challenges that fleet managers have with fueling programs. driver compliance is one, right? Ensuring drivers are using the fuel stations or partners you want them to use, following proper procedures. And especially in larger fleets, that can be really challenging. So there's other things like fraud and misuse, right? I know we want to think that none of our drivers are stealing fuel. We know that that can be 2 to 3% on average, and for some fleets, much more. Lack of visibility is a problem. I know when I was running my fleet, it was this idea of where is everyone? What's everyone doing? And wanting to have that real time visibility into transactions, and more so when a driver needs help or when a driver is misusing the card. So there's two scenarios there. We want to know what's going on in real time. The other big challenge that I faced in running a fleet, and a lot of the fleet managers that I talk to are dealing with the same thing, is this idea of integrating their fuel card data with their fleet management software or system. And that can be complex, and it always doesn't always yield a seamless data transfer, for one. And then it doesn't always give the fleet manager the visibility into those improvement opportunities, like when someone's paid too much, or when they've gone to a vendor that a fuel vendor that isn't approved, or when they continuously go to a fuel vendor and they're going inside to pay. Things that we know, Phil, I know you know, are innate um, issues and are indicative of something is going on that shouldn't be. And then, and I think today's world, we're looking at fleets who are transitioning to alternative fuels. And so, how do we accommodate for that as they move toward greener options in their fleet? And I think last but 100% not least is um, managing multiple fuel card vendors, fleet suppliers and relationships, terms and conditions. All those things are cumbersome for fleet managers, and making sure that they're holding all of those suppliers or vendors or partners accountable. But you need data to hold people accountable, right? So, big list. And I'm sure that all of you folks listening out there can relate. So, when I think about solutions in the marketplace, there are a world of opportunities, and they open my mind to solve for these challenges. So, Phil, I'm excited to talk to you about this. Let's dig in. So, talk about what solutions are out there for fleet managers today.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting space. When you look at fuel cards in general in the broader market, it's super consolidated, right? There's only a handful of providers that you can choose from, and a handful more that have come on the market recently. But if we look, back 20, 30 years, right? If you wanted a fuel card, there were only a few companies out there that provided, this specific payment need for fleet operating businesses. And so, because of that and the lack of options within the market, there was, not really much push for new technologies and new ways to kind of provide these solutions. And so you've got the legacy providers that predominantly offer pins at the pump cards, right? And so for folks that are listening that are managing fleets today, this is probably what they're most accustomed to using and seeing. And that technology has not really evolved again over the last 20 to 30 years. And so, if they started on one of these programs 10 years ago, they're probably, managing the exact same process today that they were
Likely.
when they chose this provider. Right. And so that's a majority of the market. Right. And what people are pretty accustomed to and aware of. As we've seen some of the card networks start to adopt this form of payments, fleet payments specifically, it's opened up the door for new entrants. I would say in the last 5 to 7 years, and so without kind of boring people into some of the nitty gritty details, Visa and Mastercard have upfitted their networks to do these types of payments, right, and to be able to transact at gas stations with the level of controls and the level of data needed to authorize and administer these types of programs. And so it's allowed new issuers and providers to be able to build on the backs of these open loop networks the same programs that folks are familiar with the incumbents, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then,
Absolutely.
people are starting to look at even further, innovation in the space, and removing the card altogether, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
using the vehicle as a form of payment. And we can talk about, some of the challenges that we're still seeing, with some of those progressions in the innovation. But this is really kind of the options that you have, as a fleet administrator.
Yeah, and it's wild because I think, Phil, like we're in 2025. I think it was 2015 maybe when I started saying, why do we even need a card? Right? Because all the challenges that I talked about a few minutes ago, they were just hitting me in the face every day. I had to have an administrator just really manning this whole fuel card management and issues like on a daily basis. I'm like, wow, I could really use that person to be doing other things rather than shutting cards on and off, issuing new cards, all this stuff that and I was like, why are we even using a card altogether? But we know that in some cases we need that, right? And the infrastructure out there, is it really ready for cardless altogether? So talk about, since there are cards and cards are inevitable right now, what are some of those key differences in the types of card-based solutions that are in the marketplace today? What are those differentiators?
Absolutely. First, I kind of want to address your first point, right? Like, why do we even need cards?
Yes.
Um, and it's a great question, right? And we have to acknowledge kind of who's participating in these transactions, right? You have the issuers, right, who are actually administering the card programs, the banks or the card providers. We have the networks, right, that are facilitating these transactions in real time. The Visas, the Mastercards of the world. And then the third, piece to the puzzle there, right, is the merchant and the gas station. And so, we can move as fast as we possibly want, from how these cards work and how they're authorized and how people are able to use them in the field. But that fails to recognize, how quickly these fuel merchants are able to adopt to this technology, right? And so that becomes the real bottleneck oftentimes when we're thinking about new innovation in the space, and where we can take this product or this experience for drivers in the field, right? And so like, when I think about it from, like, just being a general consumer, I can get around in most parts of my life without my wallet in my pocket anymore, right? My card is on my phone, and I can
Yeah.
transact just about anywhere I want. The only place I still, have somewhat level of concern is if I go to the gas station, right? I'm still
True.
always using that plastic in my wallet when I'm transacting as a consumer. And so, right, that kind of, sums up, or is a microcosm of like what we're facing on the fleet side is, you have to kind of, take that into consideration when we're evaluating what we can and cannot do as card issuers.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
And so, you ask, like, as far as like the card-based solutions in the market, like, what are some of the key differences? And I think it boils down to three areas of how these cards work and are used, right? And so the first, you've touched on it a few times, is right. How are these cards managed and used in the field, right? What is the responsibility of the fleet manager, the team, within that business that's administering these cards, replacing cards, dealing with issues at the pump, right? Like, are there better ways to help that person and that team, right? Who feels like, it's a full-time job, right? Just administering this program, right? And so, historically, they haven't had a lot of tooling or support, from the card providers to be able to do that more effectively. And so, the cards are issued to a vehicle, right? And the employee gets a PIN number. And so you're all always constantly, issuing new PIN numbers, right? And then you're, worrying about cards that are lost or stolen, or someone gets into the vehicle in the morning and vehicle four's card is not in there, right? And so, I'm on the phone with the card provider and I'm ordering new cards, right? Or, the driver or the employee gets to the gas station and they swipe the card, and then the fuel dispenser tells them the card's declined, right? And so, what do they do? What options do they have, right? They don't really have much. Um, so they're responsible to either call the number on the back of their card, right, and deal with some, call tree to get in touch with someone to, manage that issue, or, they're calling their manager or their fleet administrator and they're telling them the card's not working. And so, they often have troubleshooting steps. Hey, go to another gas station, or let me, drop everything I'm doing and get into the fuel card account and see if I can figure out, why the decline happened, or, what information I have, at my disposal. Right. And so again, this back and forth between, the fleet admin and the card company, or the fuel card company, and then the fleet admin and the driver, is like, this constant push and pull that we're seeing, saps up resources immensely.
And it's Groundhog Day. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Over and over. It's not
Over
cool.
and over,
It's
over and over.
2025.
Right. And so that, is something that's being kind of iterated on as we speak in real time. And, we're constantly going into this digital age, and everyone's got phones and access to a mobile device. And so, right, how can we use that to, make that process easier for everyone involved? Right. How can we, take that card that was historically tied to a vehicle, and just have people check into them and let us know what vehicle they're driving, right? They're already using their cell phone. Why don't they just text us and say, hey, I'm in vehicle 4 today, and this is the card that I'm using, right? ABC123.
Which helps with the whole driver ID piece too, because that's always a challenge for fleets, and people are using key fobs, which is a whole nother podcast. But it's just, again, another inefficient, labor intensive sort of approach, where you like, who do I have on the road today? What vehicles are they driving? Making that match so that everything can go well, not just fueling transactions, but what appointments do they have today, and what customers are they seeing, and does the customer know who's coming? So I love that you touched on this idea of, you know, making that driver to vehicle match using their phone and
Exactly.
their fuel card versus some other means. I mean, if they're not doing a daily vehicle inspection, this is an alternative, right?
Exactly. Right. And like, the other big piece there is, well, if we're not actually tying that card to an individual asset, well, then we don't really care where that card ends up. Right. And if someone loses one, or one gets stolen, all you have to do is hand an additional card out to that employee, and they're back on the road. Right. And when you think about data quality and being able to actually optimize for your fleet, and understand kind of fuel costs as it pertains to individual assets, this is a game changer for a lot of folks. Right. You can now understand every single fuel purchase as it associates with the specific vehicle, right? Because you're not filling up vehicle 4 with vehicle 5's card while you wait for the one to come through the mail, to replace that, that card that's missing or stolen. And
Yeah,
so,
that's
you know,
huge.
from like a data quality and data preservation standpoint, you're going to be able to actually use this data and understand, what's going on with the fleet, as it pertains to your fuel costs, and where this fuel is going and how it's being purchased, which is something a lot of folks just they've kind of given up on, right? They've just assumed
That's
that
so
they can't
true.
get anything out of this, and so think about, like, talk to fleet operators all the time, and I ask them, how do you use your odometer data, right? What do you look at when you look at your odometers, right? You require your employees to type it in at the pump, and more times than not, it's like, oh, we don't even use it, right? If we looked at our odometer data on our fuel card, half of them say 99999, right? um, and so
I've been there. I've
the
been there.
purpose, right, of collecting this information to begin with, right? If we can't action against it, right, and if it's making things more challenging for a fleet administrator, well, they don't have time, right, to reconcile and fix these things, as they're happening, right? If you're managing a few hundred vehicles, 1,000 vehicles, even 25 vehicles, right, like,
Right.
this gets out of hand pretty quick, and so therefore you chalk it up as a loss. And so, by communicating with drivers via the phone, right, we eliminate a lot of that, right, because we're taking the keypad, out of play.
Yay. That just like music to my ears, and I'm having a little sort of I hate to use PTSD because that is a real thing, but when I think about the fuel card program, man, going back there puts me in a dark place sometimes. And Robbie, if you're listening, he was one of my fleet administrators at Safelight, and oh goodness gracious, this poor guy. I mean, it was all day, every day, um, until we could get something a little more reliable going on. But I can tell you, I think a lot of fleets, big and small, are in that place of when you said they've given up, I think you're right. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm throwing my hands up. Like this is age old, but I love the fact that you've said, okay, here are the kind of solutions we have out there. Most of them have been around for a really long time, but the differentiation between a card program that operates in a more digital way, I think is this good marriage between a card program that's sort of standard and a cardless program. This kind of falls right in the middle of a place where we can do driver to vehicle ID. We can look at data in real time. And then you mentioned about, having the data. When I think about fuel data, I think about wanting real time alerts. I think about wanting accurate reporting, whether that's for fuel reporting that's mandated, whether it's usage because I'm tracking it's part of my sustainability plan, whether I'm trying to look at how I can reduce fuel costs overall. Aside from what we can do with the vehicle and the driver behavior stuff, there's a lot of opportunities here. So talk about the integration between the FMS or fleet management system and the fueling programs. And talk about how this can solve for many of the issues that we've been pointing out,
Yeah,
so far in this conversation.
it's a great piece to the conversation, and something that like we at Coast take very seriously, right? And this term integration has become such a buzzword in the industry.
Yes.
We talk to fleet operators and business owners. They all want to know whether you integrate with this or you integrate with that. But when we dig a little deeper, we ask them kind of what integrations mean to them, and a lot of the times, right, it's not actually very useful, right?
Mhm.
The way these integrations are constructed or work is it's a file transfer at the end of the day, right? And data is being passed back and
And that's
forth.
not a true integration.
And that really doesn't do anything. That just adds more work for you, right? As an administrator, right? Oh, here's a new report that I want you to look at, that you will then have to action against, right? And so I've now just added additional steps to my process, and maybe even more friction with drivers or employees out in the field, right? Where at the end of the day, now I'm responsible to call someone out for something I'm seeing in some sort of reporting dashboard. Well, is that even true or not, right? And so, we see a lot of friction when it comes to, hey, well, this is already integrated with my fuel card. And when we dig a little deeper, all it is telling them that, hey, at the end of the day, we took a look yesterday and your vehicle was here and the card was swiped over here, right? And so now
Super
your
reactive. Yeah.
responsibility is to now go confront that employee and try and prove to them why you have information that states that they were using the fuel card inappropriately, or against policy, right? And it just becomes a he said she said game, right? As to, well, actually, was there, right? Was the data correct, right? Is this reporting accurately? And so it's challenging to manage, and when we think of integrations and what that means to us, it's more about how we can automate some of the sort of fraud prevention or theft or security, that you're currently doing as an individual, trying to manage the fleet. And so taking real time data from your GPS provider, from your telematics provider, and ingesting that in real time, and then making decisions about where and when this card is allowed to be used, right, is extremely valuable to business owners, right? There's an assurance there that if my company vehicle isn't at the gas station, right, like I don't want this card to work, right? There is no situation where I want to allow, right, my fuel card to be swiped if you can tell me that my company vehicle is 4 miles down the road, right? And so taking that off of the fleet admin, the business owner, as a responsibility to police this is extremely powerful, and a super effective way to curb abuse and theft at the end of the day. And so When we think of integrations, it's API based, it's real time, right? And it's using data from a third party to inform our decision making about when these cards should work.
The word that comes to mind is proactive, right? I mean, we've never been in a position to be that proactive because, again, like you mentioned, it's always talking about events that already happened with operations managers who are busy and wearing 10 hats, with drivers who are on to the next thing. But having the ability to really look at the approval process for transactions differently and sort of, taking these data points and evaluating them in real time and making a decision based on these data points allows us to say, okay, let me hit this off at the pass. And then I don't have to deal with it tomorrow in a reactive report that I got a day later. Then I have to evaluate and call someone and yada, yada. So a combination of like this idea of not having to order new cards and have them mailed and waiting on, all the things that we've talked about, this fleet administrator role in a scenario like this, it changes, and it changes in such a positive way where they can focus on things like, hey, let me look into data. What interests me when I'm not dealing with all the minutia of fuel card management is, hey, what areas are we fueling in where maybe we're overpaying? And we can steer those drivers to a vendor that is going to be 10 cents less a gallon. Or I can focus on areas where I'm seeing an increase in fraud, or areas where I'm seeing an increase in efficiency. Drivers might be driving out of the way to fuel. All those challenges, I can focus on some of the challenges that aren't directly affected by the fuel payment program, that really affect my cost and really affect my efficiency, right?
I think it's such a great point, Aaron. And like, when businesses are evaluating fleet payments and fuel cards as they're growing and starting to look at this as a category, they're diving into this for one reason, right? It's, I'm trying to like prevent fraud and misuse of credit card programs because we as fleet operators, have a very unique position in society where our businesses, we have are required to hand out company credit cards to any employee, right? Whether we run a seasonal business and we're hiring someone tomorrow that is coming on and maybe gone in 3 months, right? Or we've got all of these folks that are switching vehicles and stuff, and so you're looking at this category for a specific reason. And what you're finding when you use some of these, legacy providers is that these cards actually aren't working for you, right? There's ways to game the system. There's ways to kind of, do things that, people won't be able to catch. And so, what's going on in the industry, right? And kind of the evolution of these card payment solutions is that, getting them to actually work for you, right? And be that first line of defense, where that's what you were sold or were looking for to begin with. You're finding that that wasn't the case. And so, with these integrations, right, you're able to like, really make sure that if these cards are swiped, right, I can without a doubt know that it was used for my company vehicle.
Absolutely. And I think that's a segue into this last topic, which is a tough one. Um, you know, my perspective on switching providers, right? So if I'm using some provider that is putting me in this reactive position, like I've described, and I'm faced with all these challenges, like we've both described today, the thought of switching providers just it feels painful. In my opinion, the real pain is staying with somebody who's subpar, right? I have a whole podcast that talks about switching tools and technology in fleet, and in that episode, I think I start out with by saying that the real pain is in staying with, the status quo. I mean, who wants to be average? Who wants to be status quo? So, you want to elevate your career in fleet, make changes, right? So switching fuel providers or card providers, payment solutions is a tough task. So walk us through this from your perspective. I have plenty to say as a fleet manager, but want to hear what you think about. How do we do this?
First, I will sympathize with you and with
Yeah.
any of the folks listening. Like this is hard, right? Like I'm not going to sit here as a card provider and tell you that like, oh, this is the easiest part, right? Because I understand where folks are coming from, right? There are like real key reasons why this is challenging historically and with other solutions, right? First, it's like administrative headaches, right? Like updating payment methods, right? Dealing with approvals and paperwork to get these things set up and making sure that your boss's boss signs off on this, and like having this like all like in a place where everyone's giving a thumbs up is that takes a lot of resources to get everyone on the same page to begin with, right? The next is like probably like data migration issues, right? Like losing transaction histories, right? Or reconfiguring all of your reporting, right? Some of this stuff might have been in place for years, right? And so, having that in place with your new provider, right? That could take some time, and there's concern that like, is that going to look apples to apples? I've like worked within this specific report for quite some time, and like, is this new system going to behave or look similar to what I'm familiar with, right? And so there's certainly concerns there. The biggest piece I think is like employee resistance, right? And getting drivers and other administrators of the program on board with this change, right? Do they feel like they're being reprimanded or disciplined, and that's why you're switching, right? Or is this more friction to their normal process? Needing new logins, right? Retraining folks. These are real tasks that go on, when you decide to make one of these changes. Um, and I think the other piece is like lack of support, right? Is it like, is this a black box? Am I going to be responsible to do all of this on my own? Right. And that do I have time to do that? Right? Am I capable? Do I have the bandwidth? And so these are all legitimate concerns that folks have, and something we encounter all the time. And so, like, we are super focused on like, how do you alleviate some of those issues, right? And how do you help people through these processes to make this successful? Because you're right, like staying with a provider where you're susceptible to loss, or you're incurring hours and hours every single month managing these programs where you could be repositioning those resources to things that actually help you grow and expand your business. Well, right, these are actually like silent killers, right? And so what are we doing to like make that transition more seamless, right? First, it's like, hey, like these integrations like are very easy to set up and ingest. And so like without shamelessly plugging in IntelliShift, right? Like if you were an IntelliShift user and you wanted to use our product, it's 2 clicks of a button, and all of a sudden all of your vehicles are now in the system, right? There's no managing these vehicles and disjointed processes. So these integrations are extremely valuable, right? It's plugging in with your ERP or your accounting software in real time. So now, as soon as this goes live, every single one of these transactions is flowing back into your bookkeeping so that you can close your books, and you're not, opening up a credit card and you don't have visibility from an accounting or controller standpoint of where these transactions are taking place.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, this idea of um, reporting being consistent, right? Level 3 data is level 3 data, right? So it's going to flow, with whatever card you use, you're going to get that data. I think one thing that fleet managers who are listening should consider is pick your partners wisely, right? Really get that buy-in with your operations team, you know, building that ROI model. I have a whole podcast, I think it's episode maybe 5 on change management, where I talk about when you're thinking about something new and it makes sense for your organization, it's your job to sell it. And I go through all the right steps to take and who to get involved. And what you described is that pre-work to make sure that everybody's on board, so that when you go to reissue cards and get things up and running, that people are excited about it. So that communication and pre-work. So drivers and operations managers specifically are like, they know what's in it for them, right? They immediately know what's in it for them.
100%, right? And so, like, what considerations or what sticking points to those people care about, right? From a controller to a CFO. Hey, this is going to save us money. Boom, there's the thumbs up, right? From a fleet admin team, hey, this is going to eliminate our, need to reorder cards or reissue pins every single week. Thumbs up. Hey, to the driver, hey, when you're stuck at the pump, well, they're actually now communicating with you via text message. You'll get a notification as soon as that decline happens. You'll know exactly what's going on, right? You won't have to call me every single time. And so now we have just kind of assembled really good use cases for everyone that's going to be impacted by this change as to how this is going to make their lives easier, how this is going to save our business money, right? And that's really what people care about at the end of the day.
They do.
And it's not the most sexy thing, but like customer support and like concierge service as you're switching is invaluable, right? At the end of the day. And being able to have multiple points of contact that know your business, know your setup, know your use cases, right? And can make sure they can configure this program exactly as you need. And have these cards in your folks' hands as quickly as possible. That's the huge piece here, right? And
Absolutely.
again, we see with a lot of our, incumbents in the space, these are large, multinational corporations. Getting someone to know you by name is nearly impossible. And so when you're administering these programs, you're on your own, so to speak. And so that's a piece that fleet managers should recognize. Having the support needed to set this up correctly the first time is extremely important. And so I think that's something, as you're like evaluating these options and you're looking to change, what is the level of communication I've been receiving through this process? Is it taking me, 2 emails to get in touch with someone? Can I pick up the phone and reach out to someone and they know who's calling,
Imagine
right?
that, right? Making a phone
Um,
call and you get someone on the other line who picks up and is like, "Hello, how can I help you?"
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
imagine that, right? That's so critical, and I think people have just been conditioned, and you mentioned this earlier when you said, "I think they've just given up." I think that's true, and I think they've been conditioned to accept customer service that is not a real experience, that is a what we've come to expect, what we've come to know, and that's mediocre. And again, who wants to be mediocre? No one. I think that kind of what we described is there is something different, right? There is true integration between FMS providers and this in the fuel card and payment card space. There is true integration that can bring people an experience that is proactive, that is intuitive, that can eliminate or drastically reduce the time um, and labor intensity that fleet managers and administrators are spending on fuel card programs. That, yeah, there's more, right? It might be cards, but there's a different experience here. So, I love some of the points that we've made around challenges and how truly integrated programs solve for those. Anything else we want to share with our listeners today, kind of to close us out, Phil, on what's possible as we think about programs like
No,
this?
I think the only other thing I would call out here too, we talked about renewable energy and new fuel sources and how people are going to migrate into this EV world at some point. Um, we still think there's a long way to go there as well. Um, it's a very disjointed process from who the charge point operators are. In often case, you have to download their app and then upload a card onto their app, and then finding where you can charge or how you're going to charge, whether it's going to be at home or at the depot or on route, right? There's a lot of question marks that we're evaluating, every single day, and I think it's going to take some time, right? Is what
I
we're
would
seeing,
agree.
right?
Yeah.
ICE vehicles are still ruling the road. Most of these businesses are still predominantly buying ICE vehicles. And so we're going to accommodate, today, while still keeping our ear very close on what tomorrow looks like. And so I would say for folks that are evaluating these options, from like a payment solution standpoint, the market is going to evolve pretty drastically, same way that, the electrical vehicle market has evolved over the last 5 years, right? And the step change growth in the battery and how these vehicles perform, right? The way we kind of facilitate energy consumption with these vehicles, it's we're a few years away, I think, from it really becoming level set into how this works, right, and being in parity with how we fuel up gas and diesel. So I
Agreed.
would just say one other thing for your listeners is, like, don't feel like you're behind the eight ball. um, Us as payment providers
Right.
are still kind of waiting in the wings and trying to figure this out ourselves. And so it'll become clear over time. It'll become easier to understand. And so, when you're ready to kind of make that jump, just make sure that the systems that you're surrounding yourself with are capable of providing you the same experience that you're getting today with your traditional ICE vehicles.
Well said. And I think that that's a great way to kind of close today, that, an integrated experience is possible. And I love how you said, surrounding yourself, really finding those partnerships. I hate to say the word vendor or supplier, but those trusted partnerships that really feel like an extension of you and your business, that feel customized. But Phil, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise in this payment space, among other things. It's been so great to have you with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Erin. And always interested in talking with folks in the space about this. And yeah, I'm sure you guys will see us around at conferences and industry shows. So feel free to stop by and say hello. We're eager to talk about this stuff all day long.
Yeah, likewise. And Fleet community, as always, thanks for joining us today. We hope that the content today got you excited about what's possible as it relates to the challenges that we highlighted today around payments and around fuel. Obviously, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Phil. You can find both of us on LinkedIn, among other places, if you want to learn more about that fully integrated experience that we talked about today in our podcast. And if you've enjoyed today's content, as I always say, hey, like, comment, subscribe to the Straight Talk on Fleet, or wherever you find your favorite content. But as we like to say on Straight Talk on Fleet, until next time, keep it real, keep it safe for fleet's sake, and thanks for joining us.